Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Lovecraft Country episode 5. Let's talk about it. So first of all, when it comes to my reviews of this series as a whole, I have to say that whilst I have been diving into the socio-political context, the historical context of the show, I don't think I've been doing enough justice in serving the story of the show itself, the main storylines, especially when it regards to, the magic, the mysticism, the lore surrounding this very Lovecraftian story. I don't think I've really delved into that enough. And to be honest, it's mostly because, horror really isn't my genre, isn't really the genre that I gravitate towards, but I still feel like this is such a great show that I'm doing it a little bit of a disservice by kind of sidestepping a lot of the specificities of the story itself. So that's going to end today because I absolutely loved episode 5 and I want to delve into each and every crevice of this episode because I think it really does deserve a very deep and insightful dive into this episode. There's so much to be discussed, just like with all of the episodes of this show, but especially here. And on top of that, in order to prepare for this review, I even did some extra reading. Yes, ma'am, I did some extra reading. I looked at some articles. I looked at a Reddit thread. Like, I'm ready. I'm ready with the knowledge, and I'm here to tell you guys what I thought and what I found from this episode of the show. But before we get into my review and my recap of episode 5, I would very much appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Okay, without further ado, let's get into this. So I'm going to be breaking this down in accordance with the 3 main storylines that we followed throughout this episode. And of course, first things first, we have the character of Ruby. Now, this was a very Ruby heavy episode, which I'm delighted to see because I'm really interested in this character. And this episode just proved me right because she was fascinating, but also she was incredible. The first thing that we see in this episode is a white woman waking up and she stretches out her arms and she looks at them and realizes that something is off, which creates a lot of confusion, a lot of distress. And then she's frantically running around the room. She sees herself in front of a mirror and she's like, oh, that's not my body. That's not where I belong. What am I doing in this skin? And of course, we can immediately infer that this is the character of Ruby that is living inside of this white woman's body. Now, if you're paying attention, like I was, you would have noticed that this white woman is actually familiar because she also makes an appearance in episode 2. She was that crazy racist lady that lived in that small town with the guard dogs. Now, I don't know if it's a case where the actress has actually been cast for 2 separate roles in this series, or if that woman from episode 2's body is being used in order to house Ruby temporarily. But either way, I think it was very interesting that they decided to use that same actress, and hopefully we'll get a bit more of an explanation as to why it is that her body was so readily available. So once Ruby discovers that she is living inside someone else's body, she is frantic, she is distressed, she is distraught, and she runs around South Chicago barely dressed like a mad woman. And you can see that the black population of her neighborhood is absolutely confused. They are so befuddled by what they are seeing. This white woman who just appeared out of nowhere in their black neighborhood, and she's screaming and she's frantic, and it just scares everyone. Now, there are so many reasons, there's so many layers to this for as to why they would be terrified, because at the end of the day, she is a white woman in a black neighborhood during this time. So not only are they afraid for her, they're also afraid because she's in such close proximity to them and she's in this state. And they know, as it's proven minutes afterwards, that if the police or the authorities were to get involved, they would be the ones who would be blamed for this woman, this white woman's state. And when the police do get there, you can see that everyone is just terrified. They are terrified to get involved because they know that even the slightest involvement would bring them the worst, the harshest punishments, just purely because they are black in the proximity of a white woman. And here is where you have what I believe to be a nod to the Emmett Till case, where you have this young black boy who's being accused of assaulting this woman. He faced some severe and inhumane consequences after a white woman had lied and said that she had been assaulted by him. But in this episode, you see that it's juxtaposed against this situation where Ruby is there, and on the inside, she is a black woman and she fears for this child. And so she even though she's already confused, even though she's already distressed, she makes a point to emphasize that he did absolutely nothing wrong because she knows how fast, how quickly things can turn left. I've also seen in some Reddit threads that there is another nod to Emmett Till. I can't remember the name name of the character, but he's a recurring character on the show that's made an appearance in the earlier episodes. I'm not certain if that's the same boy that we see depicted here, but if it is, then that would just reaffirm the idea that that is a nod to that famous, or rather infamous, case. So Ruby's first outing as a white woman is incredibly eventful, and another thing that we get on top of the whole experience of being in a black community as a white woman is some good old-fashioned benevolent sexism. We see this in the form of the police officers kind of taking guardianship over her and making sure that she's okay and that she's going to be heading towards her husband, who has forewarned them that she has these issues, she has these manic fits, and as a result it's to be expected that she would react in the way that she does. And of course the sexism comes from the fact that they're not listening to her, they're not listening to what she's going through from her own mouth. Instead, they've taken the word of her husband, who has forewarned them about these things, and they've just assumed that this is correct, that this is the truth that he is saying. So you see this time and time again in society where women are just not believed. And this could also be a commentary on, you know, domestic abuse and how the police handle that. Or this could also be a commentary on just in general how women aren't believed, they're not listened to, especially when a man has already taken that position, taken on that role as their guardian. So when Ruby does reach William's residence, she's hauled out of that car and taken back to the house, where she's just kind of laid on some plastic sheet where he just rips apart this outer skin of Hillary. It is horrific, and this is what we get a lot of in this episode. We get a lot of gore, we get a lot of body horror, and that continues the show's pattern of exploring different subgenres of horror in each episode. We saw this in the haunted house episode, you know, the evil cult, and now we're seeing some body horror, some horrible gore time and time again. It is horrendous, but the special effects are really good. And whilst this is happening, we do see a news report in the foreground that's kind of foreshadowing the events of the episode. We see that this reporter is talking about the millions and millions of Kenyan locusts that are heading towards the UK, and that these locusts shed their bodies, they go through a metamorphosis 5 times before they become mature and go on a rampage. And so through this very clever story device, we get the introduction of the main theme of this episode, which is metamorphosis, and we also see the fate that ultimately awaits Ruby. Now, the theme of metamorphosis embeds itself in all aspects of this episode, but we particularly see it in the character of Ruby, who takes on this entirely new persona. She goes through this entire transformation to create the character of Hilary Davenport, who can move through the world as a white woman, facing far fewer issues than Ruby does as a black woman on a daily basis. And during this experience, she sees time and time again a lot of her assumptions on white privilege be reaffirmed in the way that people are treating her in comparison to how they would treat her as a black woman. She gets a free ice cream, she gets to wander around the park, no problem, no questions asked. And not only does she get the job of her dreams, which is working at that department store, but they even give her the position of an assistant manager, which is much more reflective of her qualifications. And also we see how her white colleagues are so much more welcoming towards her, they're so much more comfortable with her in a way that they're not towards Tamara, who is the black employee in the store. They're so comfortable, in fact, that it is not long before their conversation steers towards racism, racist comments, just needlessly. Ruby makes an offhand remark about how underemployed Tamara is for the position, and they jump at the opportunity. They jump at the opportunity to disgrace the whole race. Just every single black person is bad now because of this one person's underachievements. Now, this is just completely unfair, and of course that's just the basis of racism. It's just the stereotyping and the prejudice against an entire race based on nothing, based on no facts whatsoever. But in that moment, it's clear that Ruby becomes very aware that her words mean something, that her words need to be carefully chosen, because she could impact the way that these women see not only Tamara, but the black race in general. She also gets to experience firsthand white people's fetishization and voyeurism towards black culture. And we see that during their interaction in the break room, where Ruby starts to dance and she's having a good time, she's swinging her hips all rhythmically, and they're like, oh girl, like you're dancing like a black woman. They immediately dive into that narrative of, you know, the Negroes are so fun, they're so entertaining, they're inferior to us, but they're so much fun, they know how to have a good time. They're not as smart as us, of course, and they're not as important as us, like they're inferior, but still they do know how to have a good time, those Negroes, right? And that prompts the ladies to ask Tamara to take them on a night out in South South Chicago so they can have a good time. They can indulge in their voyeurism and indulge in their cultural appropriation before they tap out and go back to their, ordinary but more significant, more important, cleverer lives. So it's made very clear that these characters are just there to dip in and momentarily experience the excitement and the indulgence of being around Black people. But when the going gets tough, they're always going to head back to the North Side. And speaking of Tamara, on this fateful night, we also get to find out why it is that she was hired by the manager despite being so underqualified. And of course it was because of misogyny. Of course it was because the manager was only interested in her physical appearance. This is such an interesting character arc, character journey to be explored in this episode as well, because there's so many different layers to it. Of course, we have the kind of Me Too angle where we have this person who's in a position of power and superiority in the organization, and he wants to take advantage of this Black woman who is just the lowest of the low in terms of the employment hierarchy. But at the same time, we also see this story through the eyes of Ruby and not Tamara herself. And Ruby has some envy, some jealousy towards Tamara, because the thing is, Ruby prescribes to respectability politics. We saw that in the previous episode during the house party where she was talking about, if you just work hard, if Black people just work hard and we got the qualifications and we did what we could to get these jobs, we would thrive. That's all it takes, is just working a little bit harder than they have to. And she admits, you have to work a bit harder, but still, it's just that hard work that will see you through. Except now that's been proven wrong, because she sees Tamara and she sees that she applied for her dream job on a whim, which was already enough of an insult. But then she also finds out that Tamara doesn't have any of the qualifications that she does. So now she's realizing, hang on, it's not just hard work that's a factor here, even for a fellow Black woman. Here we have a case where Tamara is slimmer than Ruby and she's more conventionally attractive. And so Ruby kind of ascertains that Tamara managed to get the job based on her appearance alone. And that just breaks her heart, because it completely destroys the respectability politics. It completely destroys what she thought was happening in this world. And it just creates a whole other hurdle that she has to surpass, something that she can't help, which is literally that the body that she is in, not just the skin, but the body, the fact that she is a plus size Black woman, is what's hindering her from getting ahead in life. Now, I personally was really surprised to see that Tamara ended up being hired because the manager was just attracted to her. I didn't realize that was the angle that they were going for. I thought that Christina had a hand in getting Tamara hired because she knew that Ruby was vying for that job and she wanted Ruby to be at her most vulnerable, at her most broken when William approached her. And so she kind of engineered this kind of worst day ever for Ruby, so she would be at that position where she would just be willing to accept that potion and accept this version of a new reality so that she could do her a favor in return. But instead, the story does take a Me Too turn, and we do see that Ruby witnesses the almost assault, the almost rape of Tamara, and it infuriates her. That is such a watershed moment for the character, because she realizes that she cannot even bear to be in the skin that she is in. She hates it. All of a sudden, she just wants to crawl out of it, and she does. Instead of taking the potion once again to join the gang back in that club, she decides to just let the metamorphosis happen, and she crawls out of Hilary Davenport's body with a vengeance. Now, this represents her fourth metamorphosis, and you'll remember from the news report, they said that it takes 5 in order for those Kenyan locusts to become fully mature. We see the 5th metamorphosis occur when she finally addresses and finally confronts the manager of the store. And at first, she's pretending to seduce him as Hilary Davenport, but then she starts to assault him, even going as far as to rape him with her stiletto heel, which we'll talk about my thoughts on that in a second. But slowly but surely, Ruby claws out of Hilary Davenport's skin, and she makes it very clear to that store manager that she wants him to see her. She wants him to know that a Black woman was the one who assaulted him, and she just kind of leaves the place, I guess leaving a trail of blood and guts and gore behind her. Now, in terms of this scene specifically, I will say that whilst I expected the violence and the gratuitous gore, I did think that her raping him with her stiletto heel was a step too far. Maybe we didn't need to turn it up to a 12. Maybe we could have just stayed at an 11. Like, that was fine. But that was just a step too far for me personally. Speaking of metamorphosis, Ruby isn't the only person who goes through this very physical, horrible process, because we see at the very end of the episode that as William walks through the door, he can barely make it to the mysterious basement before he falls to the ground and turns into Christina. I have so many thoughts surrounding this, but first of all, one of the main reasons why I wanted to dive into this episode with a little bit more depth and a little bit more analysis is because the fact that I couldn't see this coming really irked me. I can usually see these things coming, but once I saw on a Reddit thread like last week that people had already guessed that Christina and William were the same person, and they pointed out how they'd never had scenes together, I was like, oh wow, I've been asleep. Oh wow, have I even been watching this show? I've been asleep. I can't believe I never saw that. Like, I knew that they resembled each other, obviously. I just thought they were just some weird twins, I guess. Like, I don't know, or maybe just like inbred children in order to keep the blood pure. Like, I have no idea. But the fact that they're the same person, the fact that Christina literally makes an appearance in the previous episode and then disappears, and then William comes out, like, I should have seen this coming. I really should have seen this coming. So I made sure to pay more attention this time round. And so I wasn't particularly shocked to see Christina crawling out of William's body. Now, was I disappointed in this twist? Yep, absolutely. And the reason why is because there's this small, terrible, awful part of me, the part of me that wants to see the world burn, that sort of ships William and Ruby. Listen, I don't make the rules, but I kind of like them together. And I know that this relationship is toxic and it makes absolutely no sense, and I don't know what that says about me, but I feel like William actually cares about Ruby. Like, am I being crazy? Am I being tricked as well? Because I knew that he was tricking her from the get-go, to be fair. But I feel like maybe as time goes on, this show has me hooked, what can I say? But I will say this kind of raises the question of, what is Christina and Ruby's relationship there? Like, are we alluding to perhaps an LGBTQ relationship in that front? Or is Christina completely detached from William's interactions and William's relationships somehow? I especially have no idea how Christina and Williams does. Speaking of Christina, she does make sure that Ruby pays the price for this whole metamorphosis journey by asking her to play the role as a maid. When I saw that, so insulting, but of course that's what Christina would want her to do. She wants her to play the role of a maid so that she can attend one of these evil racist cult meetings where she can place this, I guess, enchanted object in the office of Captain Lancaster, I believe his name is. You see that when she's just a black maid, no one pays her any mind, no one gives her any attention. She just becomes invisible in the room, someone who's just serving them but has no purpose other than that. And that actually helps her when it comes to her mission, because she's able to get through the place no problem. Literally no one sees her, although of course she is almost caught and she has to run into the closet where we finally see who was hiding behind that. And I'm not even going to dive into that too much for this video because I have no idea. I literally have no idea. I have no clue what's going on that front, and I certainly have no clue as to why the captain, as he unraveled his shirt, revealed a black torso. Is that what I was supposed to see? Like, he has a black torso. He has stitching around his collarbone, and from the neck down, he has a black torso. What's going on? I literally have no idea, and I'm not even going to guess for this video because I'm sure there's more to come in terms of that storyline. But it must have something to do with his scientist friend, the one that used to live in Letty's house and was experimenting on innocent black people. Okay, so now let's dive into the character of Montrose. Now, he goes through his own metamorphosis this episode, where we see him go on this very quick, very fast-forwarded journey towards self-discovery and self-acceptance when it comes to, the topic of his sexuality. Now, whilst this was a very uplifting and a very touching moment, especially when it happened, the journey there didn't feel very fulfilled, in my opinion. So much happened in the previous episode where we saw him just overflowing with fear for his son, fear for himself as a queer black man during this time. This character is just so full of fear. To see him all of a sudden kind of go through this process of self-acceptance so quickly, especially after he killed Yahima in the previous episode and was beaten up almost to death by his son for it, I felt like it was just such a rushed journey. It was just such a rushed character arc for me. I don't know if it works because we still haven't fully resolved, his and Tick's relationship and the violence behind that. We still haven't fully resolved the fact that he killed Yahima, he killed someone, he slit someone's throat. But at the same time, we're supposed to celebrate because he went through this journey of self-discovery. Like, I'm not sure if that was fitting for this episode in particular, although of course we do see another tie into the whole theme of metamorphosis in the form of the drag queens. You see them as they're getting ready, and as the hair, the makeup and the costuming goes on, they just become free, they just become happy in their own skin, and you see how they're able to express themselves in that environment, and that's kind of what edges Montrose towards being more accepting of himself and his true sexual identity. And finally, we have Tick and Letty. Now, honestly, there's not much to be said here. Obviously, Tick freaked out when he found out that Montrose had killed the one person who could potentially have helped him read the language of Adam. He's become obsessed with the whole language of Adam situation, which I personally, even though I'm getting a bit more engaged in the story overall, I still don't care about the language of Adam. I don't care about the book of Adam. I don't care about any of that, but I might, you know, going forward. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with this storyline. It's just that Tick is kind of getting on my nerves at this point. Like, he's so obsessed with it, and I know that that's intentional. I know he's probably drawn to that magic, but in terms of, you know, the character that I'm watching on the screen, it's just kind of a bit dead, you know, like he's reading the book of Adam. It appears that the next episode is going to be focusing on his past and focusing on his experiences during the Korean War. So that should be interesting, although I do hope that that's not the entirety of the episode. It probably will be. I hope it's not the entirety of the episode because I do want to see what happens next, especially with Christina / William / Ruby. But in terms of Letty and Tick, I personally, and I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, I don't love their love story. So far, I feel like this episode has done the most in terms of building their romantic chemistry and building that relationship pretty well. But overall, my main issue is that I don't really care that much when it comes to their love story. I like their interactions and I think they're great friends. But in terms of being in love with one another, like, I just don't see it quite yet. And so as a result, I'm not terribly invested in their relationship as of yet. Oh my god, I finally did it. I finally talked through all my thoughts on this week's episode. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on episode 5 of Lovecraft Country, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.